Laura had always dreamed of becoming a mother. From a young age, while playing with her dolls, she imagined what it would be like to hold her own baby in her arms. This maternal connection existed within her as a silent call, a promise of a future that pulsed in her heart when she finally discovered she was 7 months pregnant. After years of waiting and trying, she felt her life was finally becoming complete, as if the pieces of a puzzle were finally fitting together. The morning sun streamed through the window cracks as Laura caressed her prominent belly. Living in a small town called Evergreen, a welcoming place surrounded by imposing mountains and lush valleys, she had found the perfect refuge to raise her child. The wooden house, built with dedication by her husband, Charles, a skilled civil engineer, sat on the hillside overlooking the entire town. Charles worked diligently to prepare the baby's room, painting the walls a soft blue like the sky on spring days. Beside Laura, always attentive and protective, was Pluto, a golden-coated Labrador with deep eyes that seemed to understand every unspoken word. The dog had been a wedding gift from Charles, and from day one he established with Laura a connection that transcended the ordinary bond between humans and animals. Pluto wasn't just a pet, he was a guardian, a friend, a silent confidant who sensed all the changes in his owner's body and mood during her pregnancy. On cool mornings, it became a ritual for Laura and Pluto to walk the trail that meandered behind their house, gently ascending the slope to a natural lookout point. The doctor had recommended light exercises for a healthy pregnancy, and these daily walks became Laura's favorite time. Pluto walked calmly beside her, occasionally sniffing a bush, but always returning to check if Laura was okay. When she needed to rest, the dog would sit patiently by her side, as if understanding the preciousness of the burden his owner carried. The Evergreen community was well acquainted with the inseparable duo. Neighbors waved as they passed by, and many had already gifted Laura small baby clothes, keeping alive the warm tradition of small-town life, where everyone shares in the joy of new life. Among these neighbors was Joe, a middle-aged man who lived alone in the blue house in the valley. A former firefighter, he now dedicated his time as a volunteer with the local rescue team, known for its occasional storms and landslides during the rainy season. That Wednesday, the sky broke into a crystal-clear blue that fooled any weather forecast. Laura woke up feeling especially energized. The baby had moved a lot during the night, as if dancing to a rhythm only he could hear. Charles had left early to oversee a construction site in a neighboring town, promising to return that evening with the mobile for the crib he had ordered. "Let's go, Pluto. It's a perfect day for our walk," Laura called out as she tied her special maternity sneakers. The dog immediately got up from the rug, wagging his tail with contained enthusiasm, as if he knew he needed to moderate his energy because of his owner's condition. They followed the familiar trail, the scent of damp earth and vegetation mingling in the morning air. Laura breathed deeply, feeling connected to nature and the life growing inside her. She talked to Pluto and the baby, sharing plans and dreams, imagining how it would be when the 3, now 4, could make the same journey together. Upon reaching the lookout point, Laura sat on her favorite bench, a flat stone offering a perfect view of the valley. Pluto lay at her feet, ever watchful. It was then that Laura noticed the first change. Dark clouds began to form over the distant mountains, advancing unusually fast for the region. The air, once light and fragrant, became dense, charged with the electricity that precedes major storms. "I think we should head back, buddy," she murmured, feeling a growing unease she couldn't explain. It wasn't just the weather changing, it was a deep intuition, perhaps a primitive maternal instinct alerting her to imminent danger. They began descending the trail with more hurried steps than usual. The wind picked up, whipping the trees that moaned in response. Pluto, always so calm, showed signs of agitation, repeatedly looking back as if sensing something Laura couldn't see or hear. That's when they heard the first rumble, deep like the roar of an ancient creature awakening from the earth's depths. Laura stopped, holding onto a nearby trunk. Her heart raced as she felt the first raindrop touch her face. Thick, heavy, a harbinger of the incoming storm. "Come on, Pluto, we need to run." She tried to pick up the pace, but her condition limited her movements. The rain intensified suddenly, turning the dirt trail into slippery mud. Laura's steps became uncertain, each movement calculated to protect herself and the baby. That's when the world seemed to crumble around her. First a tremor under her feet, as if the ground itself was breathing. Then the terrifying sound of earth and rocks collapsing above them. Laura looked up and saw, with paralyzing horror, an avalanche of dirt and stones descending the slope, engulfing trees and shrubs in its relentless path. Her maternal instinct screamed louder than fear. Protecting her belly with her arms, she tried to run to the side, seeking shelter behind a rocky formation. Pluto barked frantically, not in panic, but as if trying to guide her. Time seemed to slow as Laura struggled against the mud and incline, each step a battle against the weight of her own body and the treacherous terrain. It wasn't fast enough. The first wave of debris hit her from behind, knocking her down with brutal force. Instinctively, Laura curled into a fetal position, using her body as a shield to protect the baby. Stones and dirt continued to fall, partially burying her legs and creating a natural prison around her. When the movement finally ceased, Laura found herself in a terrifying situation, partially buried under rubble, struggling to breathe due to the dust and weight on her chest. A sharp pain in her right side indicated possible fractured ribs. The rain continued to fall, now mixing with blood and mud covering her face. "Help!" she tried to scream, but her voice came out as a hoarse whisper, swallowed by the sound of rain and wind. Desperation began to consume her when she realized she was truly trapped. Unable to free herself on her own, her thoughts raced to the baby. Was he okay? She felt small movements in her belly, signs of life that kept her clinging to hope. That's when she realized she wasn't alone. Pluto, who could have fled to save himself, remained by her side, soaked and covered in mud. The dog looked at her with an almost human intensity, as if assessing the situation. Without warning, he began to dig furiously around her, trying to remove the dirt and smaller rocks trapping her. "Pluto, stop, you can't," Laura whispered, fearing the dog might hurt his paws on the sharp stones. But the Labrador continued, determined, guided by an instinct stronger than any command. After a few minutes of futile effort, Pluto stopped abruptly. He looked at Laura with what seemed like renewed determination, and, to her astonishment, began to bark. These weren't random barks of panic or fear, but a rhythmic, loud, and persistent pattern, as if calling for help. As the minutes passed, which felt like hours in Laura's distorted perception, the intensity of the rain decreased, but her situation worsened. The cold began to seep into her bones, and the fear of hypothermia, harmful to the baby, became real. Her consciousness wavered, moments of clarity alternating with foggy periods where colors and sounds blended into a confusing symphony. Pluto, however, didn't give up. He continued his chorus of barks, occasionally returning to lick Laura's face, as if encouraging her to stay conscious. In one of the moments of lucidity, Laura heard something beyond the rain and barks. Human voices, distant but approaching. Joe was home preparing coffee when he heard the first barks. He was familiar with the sounds of the local animals and immediately realized it was a call for help. Years of rescue experience had honed his instincts. He grabbed his waterproof jacket, a flashlight, and his first aid kit, and went out despite the ongoing rain. Following the sound of persistent barks, Joe climbed the trail, now dangerously altered by water and mud. That's when he found the first signs of the disaster. A whole section of the slope had slid, creating a new scene of destruction. And there, amidst the rubble, he saw Pluto, soaked and covered in mud, barking frantically beside a partially buried form. "My God, Laura," he exclaimed upon recognizing the pregnant woman. He approached cautiously, assessing the stability of the terrain. Pluto, upon seeing him, intensified his barking as if thanking the arrival of help, while simultaneously urging immediate action. Joe knelt beside Laura, checking her vital signs. She was conscious but visibly in shock, trembling uncontrollably. "Laura, it's me, Joe. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need help. I'll call for reinforcements." Using his radio, Joe contacted the Evergreen Volunteer Rescue Team. While waiting, he carefully began removing the smaller rocks around Laura, always mindful not to trigger another slide. Pluto watched every move attentively, never leaving his owner's side. In less than 20 minutes, which felt like an eternity to Laura, the first volunteers arrived. Among them was Michael, the local doctor, bringing essential medical equipment. News of the accident had quickly spread through the small community, and soon more residents appeared, forming a human chain to pass equipment and safely remove debris. The rescue work was delicate and dangerous. Any abrupt movement could trigger another landslide or cause more harm to Laura and the baby. Michael managed to partially stabilize her condition, administering fluids through an improvised IV and constantly monitoring both her vital signs and the fetus's, using a portable monitor. The baby is stable for now, but we need to get her out quickly, Michael informed Joe, who was coordinating the rescue efforts. I'm more worried about hypothermia and possible internal bleeding. Throughout the entire process, Pluto remained vigilant, refusing to leave even when the rescuers tried to move him to create more workspace. The Labrador seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying calm but alert, as if his presence was essential for Laura's survival. After almost 2 hours of meticulous work, they finally managed to free Laura completely from the rubble. With infinite care, they transferred her to a special rescue stretcher, designed to immobilize patients with possible spinal injuries. Pluto followed every movement, his eyes never leaving his owner's pale face. The journey back to town was equally challenging. The trail was unrecognizable after the landslide, and the team had to improvise a new path, longer but safer. They took turns carrying the stretcher, with Joe leading and guiding them on the best support points. When they finally reached the main road, where an ambulance was waiting, the news had already spread far beyond Evergreen. Local journalists were waiting, drawn by the dramatic story of the pregnant woman rescued thanks to her dog's persistence. Cameras flashed as the stretcher was transferred to the ambulance, also capturing the moving image of Pluto, who desperately tried to enter. The vehicle with Laura. Let him go, Laura murmured in a weak but determined voice. He saved our lives. Joe intervened, explaining to the paramedics the importance of the animal for the patient's emotional well-being. After a brief discussion, they allowed Pluto to go inside, as long as Joe kept him under control. During the journey to the regional hospital, located 40 miles away, Laura alternated between moments of consciousness and unconsciousness. When lucid, her hand reached for Pluto's fur, as if contact with the dog anchored her to reality and hope. The Labrador remained exceptionally calm inside the ambulance, lying in the small space beside the stretcher, his eyes fixed on Laura. The hospital. The arrival of the landslide patient was already anticipated. A multidisciplinary team was on standby. Obstetrician, trauma surgeon, specialized nurses. The priority was to stabilize Laura and check the baby's condition. To the doctor's surprise, despite the severity of the accident, the fetal heartbeats remained strong and regular. Pluto naturally couldn't enter the examination and treatment rooms. Joe was responsible for him, taking him to a small garden at the back of the hospital. The dog, usually energetic, remained unusually still, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Occasionally, he looked toward the hospital entrance. His ears perked up at every movement through the automatic doors. Charles arrived at the hospital shortly after, having been contacted by Joe as soon as Laura was found. His face revealed the terror and anguish of someone who had almost lost everything they loved most in the world. Seeing Pluto in the garden, he knelt and hugged the dog, breaking into tears while repeatedly offering thanks. The doctor said that if it had taken another hour, we could have lost both of us, Joe explained, placing a hand on Charles's shoulder. It was Pluto who guided us to her. I've never seen anything like it. He didn't stop barking until we were sure. The rescue had started. Inside the hospital, Laura was undergoing a battery of tests. The initial evaluations confirmed 2 fractured ribs, several deep cuts that required stitches, and the onset of hypothermia, fortunately reversed in time. Miraculously, there were no signs of premature labor or placental abruption, the 2 main concerns in late pregnancy trauma. You have a very determined baby in there, commented Dr. Helena, the obstetrician in charge of the case, while observing the fetal monitor. And a 4-legged guardian angel out there. Laura smiled weakly, remembering Pluto's constant presence during the ordeal. He always knew when I needed him. Since the beginning of the pregnancy, he became even more protective. Laura, Charles, and Pluto's story quickly went beyond Evergreen's borders. Social media exploded with shares of the amateur video that one of the rescuers had filmed during the rescue, showing Pluto refusing to leave his owner's side. Hashtags like "Our Four-Pawed Heroes" and "Pluto the Savior" went viral within hours. Regional television channels sent teams to cover the story, interviewing Joe and other rescuers. The image of Pluto, patiently sitting in the hospital garden, became a symbol of loyalty and unconditional love. On the third day of hospitalization, when Laura was sufficiently stable, the doctors allowed a special visit. Charles entered the hospital room with Pluto, who had been carefully bathed and groomed for the occasion. The dog, usually exuberant, walked with surprising delicacy to the bed, placing his muzzle near Laura's hand. "Hi, my hero," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Pluto responded with a soft growl, as if understanding he needed to stay calm in that environment. With the doctor's permission, Charles helped the dog partially onto the bed, allowing Laura to embrace him. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. The baby began to move vigorously, as if recognizing Pluto's presence. Laura guided the dog's paw to her belly, letting him feel the movements. The expression on the Labrador's face, a mix of curiosity and protection, was captured by Charles's camera and later became one of the most shared images of the year on social media. Laura's recovery was surprisingly swift, considering the severity of the accident. After a week in the hospital, she was discharged with recommendations for relative rest and weekly obstetric follow-ups until delivery. The return home was met with a small celebration organized by the neighbors. Welcome banners decorated the street, and a gift basket for Pluto awaited on the porch. The house naturally had undergone some modifications. Charles, with the help of friends, installed a slope and rain monitoring system, in addition to structurally reinforcing the building. The baby's room was finally ready with a special day touch, a hand-painted mural depicting Pluto as a guardian watching over a crib. In the following weeks, as Laura regained her strength, Pluto rarely left her side. The Labrador developed a new habit. Each morning and night, he gently placed his head on Laura's belly, as if checking the baby's well-being. Charles joked that they already had a ready and trained babysitter. The community also transformed after the incident. Inspired by the story, Evergreen residents created a dog training program for landslide detection and rescues, led by Joe. Pluto became the honorary mascot of the project, occasionally participating in demonstrations when Laura felt up to accompanying him. 6 weeks after the accident, on a quiet early morning, Laura woke up feeling the first contractions. Labor progressed without complications, with Charles and the medical team providing constant support. And throughout the entire process in the hospital, Pluto waited patiently in the family waiting room, as if he knew a new chapter was about to begin. Sophia was born healthy, with strong lungs announcing her arrival with a vigorous cry. When Charles finally brought Pluto to meet the newest family member, everyone present, doctors, nurses, and even other patients, watched the scene with emotion. The Labrador cautiously approached the small bundle in Laura's arms, sniffing delicately before sitting down, immediately assuming his guardian position. The photo of that moment, Sophia sleeping in Laura's arms, Charles by the bedside, and Pluto sitting watchfully, was framed and took a prominent place on the living room wall, next to the headline of the local newspaper proclaiming, "Four-Pawed Hero Saves Mother and Daughter in Landslide." In the years that followed, the story of Laura, Charles, and Pluto continued to inspire people far beyond Evergreen's borders. The Labrador, gracefully aging alongside his expanding human family, became a symbol of the extraordinary connection possible between different species, a living reminder that love and loyalty can transcend barriers and, quite literally, move mountains. When Sophia took her first steps, it was Pluto's patient paws that supported her when she stumbled. When she said her first words, Pluto came right after Mama and Papa, to the family's delight. The dog, who once protected only Laura, now shared his devotion equally between mother and daughter, always attentive, always present. The landslide that nearly took Laura's life ironically ended up building something much greater, a more united community, a stronger family, and a legacy of courage that would inspire generations. And at the center of this extraordinary story was an ordinary Labrador who proved that heroism knows no species or limits. Laura's physical scars eventually faded, but the emotional marks of the rescue transformed into something precious, a deep awareness of life's fragility and resilience. Each Sophia's birthday also became a celebration of survival, with Pluto always receiving a special portion of his favorite cake. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, when Sophia turned 5, the family returned to the trail, now rebuilt and equipped with safety systems, to the spot where the landslide had occurred. At the site, a small commemorative plaque had been installed by the town, briefly telling the story of the rescue and honoring both the human rescuers and the heroic dog. Sophia holding firmly onto Pluto's collar, now with gray hair around his muzzle but the same attentive eyes, looked at the plaque with childlike curiosity as Laura read the engraved words. Here, love proved stronger than nature. Here, a dog named Pluto taught humans about courage and devotion. And so, what could have been just a tragedy in a small mountain town transformed into a timeless lesson about the invisible bonds that connect us to each other, humans and animals alike, in moments of crisis. A true story about how sometimes our real heroes have 4 paws, huge hearts, and the innate wisdom to know exactly when to bark for help and when to simply stay by our side in the darkness, patiently waiting for the light to shine again.